Oh yeah, Dan and Phil actually came out about their relationship. Oh, Darby Valentine posted, let's go. Okay. Okay.
There are certain creatures that no matter how
I practice vampirism, so this is perfect. This is perfect.
fictitious they became integrated into human knowledge, culture, and history. And frankly, there's none that has the legacy quite like the vampire. This is the brief history of vampires.
Darby, you look fabulous!
When there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk here.
Drinking blood, living forever, never being able to step foot in the sun again. What more could a person want? The story of the vampire is an ever-present and changing one, showing up in just about every country and culture you can possibly imagine, and today I'll be mentioning a good chunk of them to you, but of course, as always, it's a deep dive, and I can't cover everything in the world, so we will do follow-up videos to this, don't you worry. The word itself, vampire, didn't arise until the early 1700s, but the stories of the undead rising and being hungry for the blood of the living is an ever-present one. From long before the real-life rulers like Vlad the Impaler to the Serbian grave-checking of the 14th century. Religious figures and their partaking in human blood is truly where we start a conversation. In ancient Egypt, the thought of eternal life was a matter of fact. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Even a person's ka being the belief that it would take over your body and take you into the afterlife. It's a great place to start, in particular with the story of Sekhmet. Sekhmet was a goddess who was half feline in the representation of death and healing in ancient Egypt. She was sent by her father, the sun god.
Don't forget Isis. Her original name was Aset, and she was also like a big progenitor of the ancient vampire. Like, there's a whole mythos around her, so check it out.
God Ra, to punish mankind as his own manifestation of his anger at them. She was said to cause plagues, and more importantly in our case, she acted in a blood, lust-fueled rage, attacking everyone, almost wiping out the entire civilization. Her thirst for the blood of the Egyptians was becoming so unstoppable that her father Ra and the other gods had to step in. They dyed a large pool of beer red, convincing her that it was blood. She drank so much that she became drunk, unable to attack the Egyptians any longer, and was brought back to the gods. And as I had just mentioned, the Egyptians lived with the process and thought of eternal life. Particularly, one person's soul was the Ba. It was the tie to their existence and what made them a human. As well, they were paired with the Ka, the companion that every single person had, a spiritual double that continued the life after death of the individual, a gift given to each person by the gods. One could even relate to this as the evolution or transfiguration of the person themselves. Life after death, a matter of fact, a transformation done to the body. The Ka does require the physical vessel of the body, which is why the Egyptians performed mummifications on the dead. If the body was decomposed, the Ka could not inhabit it and you would not get your chance at eternal life. The Ba needed to exist within the form of making the person, and the Ka needed the Ba. They needed to intertwine with each other to join and create your eternal life. And this is biggest, if not the reason why the Ankh, the symbol of life in ancient Egypt, is kind of the biggest symbol associated with vampirism. It is a symbol of everlasting eternal life. In similar timing in Mesopotamia, there was a female goddess or demon entity named Lamashtu. Now, there was not a lot of text from this time period, so clarifications are hard to come by, but at the bare minimum, she was an extremely bloodthirsty, powerful entity that would prey upon children and pregnant women particularly.
A lot of people associate in Jewish religion, Jewish magic, a lot of people associate Lilith with the same thing.
Historically, she's often depicted alongside Pazuzu, who was her rival, to the degree that there is evidence that women and children would wear amulets of Pazuzu to deter Lamashtu to coming and taking their blood from them. But the continuation on the cultural concept of life after death being a matter of fact takes us over to the Greeks, who at times so undoubtedly believed in life after death that if someone murdered someone, they would dismember and mutilate the corpse in fear of the body reanimating and coming back for vengeance. Without this cultural concept of importance of the physical body after death, burials, and the entire concept of the afterlife, there would be no vampire. Although they are properly documented.
Thank you for the daily frenzy, Sokka.
In the mid-17th century, Frikolikas are creatures in Greek mythology that ate the flesh of the living.
So zombies. They're like Greek zombies.
I touched on in my necromancy video, the Greeks believed in there being a state between life and death, that you could live in some sort of purgatory of the soul, body, and spirit. And the
Okay.
ideas around Vrikolikas and people turning into them really based on living a sacrilegious lifestyle, an improper burial, or even eating the meat from a sheep that had been attacked by a werewolf, which, we'll do lycanthropes one day. But the
Bet.
creature would travel door to door, knocking, even calling out names, trying to get victims, and those who answered would die in a few days, or even become Vriokolas themselves, as they would be bringers of disease and famine to the entire town. And even just with the story of the Vriokolas and Sekhmet, we can see the association of vampires with disease, plague, and famine, and this
Yeah. If you haven't watched the new Nosferatu movie, they cranked that idea up to 11.
would be an ever-present part of the vampire's existence on history. As well, in Greek history, there was Lumia, who was the mistress of Zeus. Zeus's wife eventually found out about this, and by taking vengeance, she killed all of Lumia's children, which led to her becoming extremely violent, vengeful, and bloodthirsty, historically preying upon young children at night. As well, the Empuse was a shapeshifter that had one brass leg controlled by Hecate, or even was referred to the daughter of Hecate. They were typically appearing as a beautiful woman, using this to seduce young men before they would then attack and feed upon them. Because of their relation to Hecate, later texts refer to the Empuse as a synonym for witch. Back to the Vrikolakas. Historically, you would have to go to the creature's grave on Saturday and kill them to end their terror, and this would be kind of the whole entire basis of how you deal with a vampire. You kill him. The most common means were exorcisms, beheadings, or just good old cremation, death by fire, tried and true, which shows the qualities of vampires we still associate to this day. The impalement of killing them. As well, the Vriokolas did not decay, but they stayed the same visually, being indistinguishable from the living. As well, the attempt to stop the creation and continuation of these creatures has evidence all the way in the Neolithic period. There were instances of burials found with objects pinning either the head or chest down. More times than not, this would be stones, but there is many records of even steel or wooden stakes put through points of the body. And this would lead us into the entire practice of vampire burials, which we have great occurrence for this happening in Europe, because truly, the vampire's entire history, lore, and existence lies within European folklore. The vampire legend truly thrives with
Europe is the fucking foundation for the vampire that we understand today.
within Eastern European culture, usually as a representation of the unknown around death, general fear and loss, and of course religious guilt. More on vampire analogies later, though. Some of the absolute earliest documentation of vampiric activity in Europe takes us to the 14th century, a small Bohemian city that is now modern-day Czech in the year 1336, with record of a shepherd who seemingly just refused to die. After his burial, he was seen walking around and speaking to people. Starting as simply an odd occurrence for the town, it quickly began scaring people as it turned deadly. He began killing his former neighbors, with claims of if he stopped by your home at night and said your name, you were to die within 8 days. Of course, this would lead to the villagers having to do something about this, so they came up with the idea of exhuming his body and cremating him. But apparently, during his removal, he screamed so loud it led to someone impaling him with a wooden stick. As he gushed blood, they set him ablaze, stopping his haunting and attacks on the living members of the town. Part of what the story of the reanimation of a corpse that thrives within Slavic culture is similar to the Egyptians. They had an entire thought process that there was a soul that was
Nosferatu is based on the Slavic culture, and that's what made it so interesting.
separate from the body that continued living on after death. With this, the belief was that the soul would go on to its eternal resting place if it could travel around for 40 days of time. Typically, they would stay around their former home and work in General City. This gave credence to the concept of the soul re-entering the body, for good or for worse. Usually for worse. So burial practice became a very, very important thing within the culture. It was stressed that it had to be done properly for the soul of the deceased to be clean, fueling a certain narrative surrounding the vampire, and in this case, not the vampire, but the Uber, which the Uber appears within Turkish cultures as well, very similar to the aforementioned Slavic one. These creatures feed on the living, from humans to at times animals, via their flesh.
One thing I want to mention is that it's also Um, Also around this time, the Romani Strigoi was also very, very well known. It was becoming like more prevalent in stories and of how people died or like famines that happened in the city.
And blood. And this proper burial at times would be a point of stopping the possibility of the reanimation of the corpse or the transforming into an uber. We see archaeological evidence of what's referred to as deviant burials, but in our topic, possible vampire burials, which were from the 7th and 8th centuries. Similar to what I mentioned earlier about the 17th century Greek burials of the bodies being weighed down, typically by stones or even at times impaling of the body, we see rods or stakes, more often than not, metal tools that were put into the body to keep them in their grave. A big reason they used metal in particular was that there was a thought that the fire used to craft the metal was a form of cleansing. It made metal and steel tools into a form of purity. This was a clean object that would repel the undead from coming up. Even there being record of sickles placed around the necks of bodies laid down, so in the event of their rise from the grave to the tact, they would be decapitated in a pseudo-guillotine means inside their own crypt. And the most common deviant burial was to simply decapitate the head, moving it down out of its reach, usually around its feet, even at times burying it separately. Now, as I'm referring to these as deviant burials because that is what they're recognized for, you might be like, why no vampire word? Well, if you haven't noticed, I haven't actually used the word vampire in any of the historical stuff we've spoken about. And that's due to the fact that, this word did not come around, I believe, until 1730, and it is kind of completely unclear where the word actually came from. The word itself, vampire, doesn't have a clear-cut point of invention, but it's highly theorized on its conception. The clearest and the most likely comes from the Latin term impurus, used directly into relation of the description of the uncleanliness.
And Germany uses the word vampir
Of a corpse. Now, with this discussion of the unclean, let's take a look at the second oldest Slavic record of vampirism. Now, I do want to mention, there is belief going all the way back as far as the 9th century within Slavic cultures about vampires or the undead rising, drinking blood, all of the above. But I like to focus on what we have very staunch documentation on, and that starts within the 14th century, which is why we're here right now. Later in 1344, there was the writing about a woman who, after her burial, rose from the dead and proceeded to kill several people in the town, even dancing upon their corpses. They, similar to our previous case, dug her up and put a stake into her body, where once again blood gushed out. But in this case, the impalement of her did nothing to stop her reign of terror, so their next step was to burn her, cremate her. The issue was, when they went to do so, the fire would not start. That was until they used wood that came from the roof of the church. This, to me, is a giant pivotal point within vampire culture and the association of the church having power over the creatures and kind of being the means to their end. It starts a very adamant association of the church being a weapon against the vampire. It's once again a point of showing Christianity weaving itself into the pre-existing spiritualism of the Slavic country for the slow
colonialism
yet steady conversion of culture and religion. Let's take everyone's favorite pit stop where I talk about religion to you. Now, the Christian response to flesh-eating undead monsters coming was, of course, sin, evil, even the association of the vampire and the devil. The church weaponized its existence as the new symbol of the impurity of man and the necessity of salvation and repentance. It reinforces the power held by the church and God, that with a proper religious in-ground burial, you will avoid the risk of becoming a vampire, and of course, the power held by religious tools and items and iconography of the church itself.
Hi, sheep. I'm tripping balls right now.
Being able to kill or destroy the vampire. This, at the end of the day, was because their hand was forced. As much as a newfound spread religion could come in and convert where prayers, offers, and devotions were directed to, they could not destroy the imagination and culture of man. Instead of denouncement or denial of the vampire, the church actually created...
Why we tripping balls? I work at a vape shop and I got legal mushroom gummies. And I felt like going on a trip. Also, I understand you having to be here on mobile, you know. Sometimes desktop Twitch is bullshit.
More validity in it by using it for their narratives and creating more historical evidence of belief and frankly the parallels between the vampire and the church, both placing the importance on life within blood. And if there is life within blood, it must be treated accordingly so, and it has been for almost the dawn of time. Gladiators would drink the blood of their slain foe, believing their strength and
Oh my
power
God.
inside of the blood itself. So to drink it, it would give you the previously held strength
Oh
of the
my
man
God.
that was killed. And behind power, it was historically tied to
Mushrooms without me. You're the second person that said that. You can get the gummies off of Amazon. They don't have actual mushrooms in them. They have, like, similar components, but...
healing and health. Many historical records show people bathing in blood in a means of combating leprosy, as well in the opposite form of the medical side, where bloodletting was a means of healing and curing a person by getting rid of infected blood. Blood is power for medicine, sacrifice, worship, and frankly, existence. Is blood not the essence of life?
Blood is the most vital energy.
And with that, of course, it is intertwined in Christianity. Even Leviticus mentioning blood sacrifice in the Middle Ages, showing a large focus and interest within blood. The whole depictions of martyrs in Christ himself. When you look to medieval art, particularly Catholic medieval art, it is very bloody. It is gruesome. It is sorrowful. There was a focus on
gross.
the blood of Christ. And of course, the soon 13th century miracle of the blood of the Eucharist.
Welcome
the Gospel
back.
of John itself.
Welcome back. But yeah, no, you can get these gummies off of Amazon. They have, like, they're not psilocybin, but they have similar compounds.
States, "Who's eat my flesh and drink my blood hath eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day. For my flesh is meat indeed, and my blood is drink indeed. He that eat my flesh
Alrighty, no worries, sheep.
and drink my blood dwell in me, and I in him." Was Jesus not one who rose from the dead and gave life, power, and strength through the consumption of flesh and blood? Now, am I calling Jesus a vampire? No. But as you can see, vampirism is something that actually went with the church's ideologies. It was something that didn't really fall out of line of their belief system, so they were able to take the vampire and use it for their own personal gain. In the medieval ages, the tale of the vampire became once again a pivotal focus point. In this case, an effigy of the unknown, the fear of morality, and of course, disease, in particularly plague. Historically, many vampire events, outbreaks, and attacks would take place at the exact same time of plague outbreaks. The vampire became the unknown attacker against the area, cattle dying, infection spreading, and the mass amounts of newly dead. And a means of combating this, or to feel some level of control, the healthy would try to kill the vampire.
Tuberculosis was the most common progenitor of these fucking vampire freakouts.
Having no knowledge of science, medicine, disease, germs, any of the above, when your town was attacked and people were dying and slowly seeing the life drain out of them, there was no answer but the vampire. So the first step was to exhume the newly dead. They would start with the last villager that died, working their way forward, looking for signs of the turning of becoming a vampire.
Ow. Hi, Victoria. How are you? Oh, Jesus. I am tripping balls right now.
As reported, telltale signs were bloating from blood consumption, the darkening of their flesh. Even long...
Okay, Victoria, you've done the scream multiple times. At this point, you're doing it as a form of jump scare for yourself, ma'am.
And jutting teeth. And here's the giant issue with all these visual signs of someone turning into a vampire. This is just what human bodies look like as they decompose. Bloating. Not from blood consumption, but just bloating from death.
Yep.
Skin shrinkage after dying would make your nails look longer and your teeth look longer, just because everything was kind of pulling back from them. As well, a natural discomfort.
My way to say hello. Well, hello, girly pop.
Colorment of a rotting corpse. If you know anything about rotting corpses, they typically change color. Even on record, there were multiple instances of them saying that there was blood, fresh blood coming out of the nose and mouth of these corpses. So when you die, your organs and whatever stuff
You fill up with a bunch of gas, and then your organs start spilling whatever contents they have.
is in there begins to liquefy. And there is only so much that can be contained by the human torso, and it starts to expel itself out. More times than not, it expels itself out of the orifices of the face.
And don't forget that if it builds up enough gas, it will explode.
So people were hunting for vampires and would dig a grave up, where you would see the appearance of a largely bloated figure with fresh fluids coming out of its mouth, long fingernails and teeth. There's kind of nothing else a middle-aged guy would think other than, oh my god, this is a fucking vampire, when in all reality, this was the natural decomposition of human bodies. There's a giant gap of medical knowledge and science at the time, which would also play into instances of unknown diseases.
That's because of religion being the dominant force at this time.
Such as catalepsy, which would put people into a state of
Catalepsy!
catatonia, that to an unknown person they would appear dead, even showing low pulse in the state. And this caused certain people to be buried alive, with some historians actually believing Alexander the Great was buried alive due to an autoimmune disease disorder he had, putting him into a state of catatonia, because 6 days post-mortem he showed absolutely no signs of decomposition. This, as well as if you've seen in certain films or reference to, they used to place grave bells at certain tombs because people would be buried alive, kind of a lot more than you would think. So this was also a finding they would have exhuming bodies looking for vampires. If someone got buried alive, they would kind of freak out and even at times bite themselves, attack themselves, just in pure hysteria. So you would dig someone up and there's fresh blood and it looks crazy, and there you go, oh, it's a vampire, but they were probably actually just buried alive.
Having a fucking panic attack, bro.
I think without a doubt, the most infamous historical figure that ties association to the vampire is that of Vlad Dracul, more often referred to as Vlad the Impaler. Vlad Dracul was born in Romania and ruled areas on and off between the years of 1448 to 1477. Now, I'm not here to give you war history because truly Vlad is a pivotal piece in Romania war history as an entire whole. I'm more here to look at you on the impalement, the rumors, the truth, and the unknown of the bloody actions of Vlad Dracul.
Okay.
Historically described to the world as cruel and brutal, Vlad, a hero to his people, fought off the Ottoman Empire from seizing their land and earned his nickname the Impaler because it seemed to be a highly favored method of killing and psychological warfare against his enemies. This, of course, being after his acts of boiling people alive, flaying the skin off their feet, and
I love how she had to pause. She's like, after all of this shit.
Just general insane amounts of war torture, but once again, this is the 1400s. This is kind of what you did in war. In 1459, Vlad attacked a city of Bravzol, pillaging, burning, and destroying buildings and frankly the entire city. But most notably was the act of having men, women, and children of the city impaled onto a hill. And when I say impale, I mean full body impalement. More often than
Ass starting at the ass and coming out through the mouth.
not think cannibal holocaust. It was through one bodily orifice through the other. But there was also plenty of accounts of them being impaled horizontally. And there is even record of if you really, really pissed Vlad off, you would be impaled upside down. Now,
Damn.
him going to the city and impaling all these people did give him enough satisfaction for the day. On record, it is referred to the fact that while everyone was being impaled, Vlad had them set up his lunch table, where he sat, watched the impalement. And here's the thing with history, and especially when we get to men that become larger than life, like Vlad Dracul, is the fact that we have to take things with a grain of salt. Everything lives within a gray area. You know, there's a half-truth in everything. But it is referred to the fact that Vlad took a chunk of bread, dipped it into the blood pouring out of someone from a fresh impalement, and ate it. The most brutal act would be the creation of the Forest of the Impaled, spanning an area of 3 miles long and 1 mile deep. They impaled, on record, reference to 20,000 Ottoman people. They placed this on the trail of the Ottomans that were actively on the way to attack Vlad and his men. It effectively induced a level of horror, fear, and impending doom I don't think any of these men could have ever prepared themselves for. Vlad would later die in battle, but his legacy of being
Vlad was a fucking demon, dude. Like, he did not fuck around. He's like, okay, you wanna attack my people? Fuck you. Here's a forest of the impaled bodies of your friends and your loved ones.
a country hero, a monster beyond comprehension, and the total entanglement of vampires, real and fictional, will live on, frankly, probably as long as humans do. During the 18th century, Europe had reached a period referred to as the Age of Enlightenment, where, with more understanding and widespread knowledge of the world around them, folk tales and superstitious supernatural stories were on the fallout. More people now had a sense of what was real and not, so you would assume this would start being the decline of the vampire.
Nope.
But in all reality, the 18th century would see a vampire hysteria that had not come before. During this time, there were heightened reports of vampire attacks across southern Europe. Many historians point out a few theories on this, but it's largely agreed upon that this was due to the widespread of disease. More specifically, two diseases: pellagra and rabies. Rabies coming from the...
I can understand rabies. I'm surprised tuberculosis wasn't mentioned, because tuberculosis did affect a lot of people in the same way.
Latin term meaning madness. It is one of the oldest documented diseases, spread from animals to humans, and almost always via a bite, so we cannot ignore the correlation to the vampire as well. The major affliction from rabies is hydrophobia. This causes the afflicted to not be able to eat or drink, and the foaming appearance at the mouth from the inability of being able to swallow their own spit. As well, rabies can cause light sensitivity, fits of anger or rage, and even odd sleeping patterns, all traits of the vampire. Even some folklore surrounding the creatures adopting traits of rabies, with there being reference to vampires not being able to cross water or interact with it, seemingly from rabies-afflicted victims.
If you haven't watched The Last Voyage of the Demeter, it's really good. It is a movie made from an excerpt of Bram Stoker's Dracula, and Dracula gets on the ship to avoid interacting with water. Yeah.
The other disease I mentioned, pellagra, is caused by a vitamin deficiency or an amino acid occurrence, and pellagra is often aggravated by high corn diets. And after the Europeans pillaged into the Americas, they began shipping corn back to Europe.
Okay.
The disease will cause what's referred to as the 4 Ds: dermatitis, diarrhea, dementia, and death, as well as documentation of light sensitivity. This being paired with the...
That's so weird. You get a disease from... You get a fucking immune deficiency from high corn diets.
dermatitis. It could cause the look of a corpse. And as we know, this led to the rise in vampire burials and post-mortem vampire hunting. And with Austrian and German soldiers at war with the Ottomans, they saw first witness of this occurring, and came home to Western Europe with the story of the vampire, which fit into the ever-constant spread of disease as the answer. This created a perfect storm of validating the existence of the vampire, and with the sheer amount of desecration and destruction of corpses occurring across the entire continent, governments had to step in, creating laws against opening graves and desecrating bodies.
Hi, Jen! How are you? I am so zooted right now. Oh my god, I am still tripping. Bear with me, we're on this last reaction, and then I'm gonna go. We're talking about vampires and shit. I'm tripping off of shrooms right now.
A large shift in belief happened when the Empress Maria Theresa of Austria had her personal doctor investigate the claims of vampires, and after he reported back that vampires did not exist, she placed extremely strict laws on her people.
I'm fucking zooted, bro. Yeah.
Surrounding vampire burials and hunting. This lasted for an entire century, and you'd think, okay, great, so we're in the 19th century, people aren't really doing this. People aren't really doing it in Europe, but now we're in the 19th century of newfound America, and oh my god, did the vampire just keep...
American vampire panic was crazy, bro. It still is, to an extent.
On trucking. Mercy Brown was the daughter of a farmer living in a small city in Rhode Island, who after her death would have her body desecrated, burned, and fed to her own brother under the guise of her being a vampire. In the small town of Exeter, Rhode Island.
Yep. They fed her fucking ashes to her brother.
The consumption was on the spread, nowadays more commonly referred to as tuberculosis. The consumption was referred to this because It consumed
We finally got to
It
TV.
ate you. You would start dropping weight, and you would see the life essentially leave a person. And the spread of this from not just those dying, but those around them catching the consumption, which, as mentioned, there is no knowledge of germs and how you spread disease at this point to these people. So they kind of don't comprehend how this entire family is getting cleared out by a disease. They think it must be. Were you paying attention? The curse of the vampire! Duh!
Yeah.
Plagues don't exist, disease
I was gonna say it, goddamn Darby.
doesn't exist. It's obviously a vampire plaguing everybody. And here's where I'm testing if you've really been paying attention today. We have disease spreading. We know it has to be a vampire. What do we do?
Exhume the corpse. Burn it. Stake it.
That's right. We exhume the dead, baby.
Yeah.
So they began digging up the dead, looking for those that appeared unaffected by death. George Brown had
I'm
lost
a
his wife and
genius.
2 daughters to consumption, and his last living family member was his son, who had become extremely ill. George, wanting no part in this vampire hunt, had to be convinced to allow the exhumation of his dead wife and children. He eventually did so. His daughter Mercy was the most recent death, who had just died 2 months previously. And once exhumed to the absolute untrained eye, she would show no signs of decomposition. It is worthy to note, this is due to the fact that she had died in mid-New England winter. Her
She was frozen.
body essentially being kept on ice. As well, they said it appeared her fingernails had grown. But as I've established to you, this is the natural decomposition of skin shrinking on the human form.
Yep.
But this, to these pseudo-hunters, were the marks of being a vampire. So they in turn cut her heart out of her chest, burned it, and proceeded to feed the ashes to Mercy's brother in a means of breaking the vampire curse. And it may or may not come as any surprise to you to hear that
He died.
unfortunately her brother would also die in relation to consumption. Now, if anything, all this did was aggravate it, but it did little to stop the disease. Which, believe it or
Yeah.
not, historically at one point, New England was referred to as the capital of vampires due to just how much of disease was spreading, and their answer being, it's vampires, and exhuming the dead and mutilating their corpses. When it
It's so crazy too, because tuberculosis, because of how against vaccines we're getting, tuberculosis has come back into the mainstream as well.
in all reality, it was just general disease spread that they had no knowledge of how it worked. Now, at this point in the video, you might be feeling a little unfulfilled. You're not getting your vampire fix. I haven't talked about sharpened teeth, hiding from the sun, turning into bats. That's really all because all of these tropes of the vampire are birthed out of Gothic literature and not the real ghoul-lined history we have. The first
Exactly.
reference to literary vampires is typically seen in short poetry, mainly coming out of Germany. Most of these are just in the reference to the dead rising and allegorical natures for the church. The
Yep.
first fully recognized English story written about vampires was The Vampire, written by John William Paldari, which was
Ooh.
published in 1819. Which, fun fact, he actually wrote this story and was put into the same competition that Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein for. So this competition has birthed quite a few really historically important literature pieces. I think even
I did not know that. That is awesome. Holy shit.
Prometheus is from this as well. But even this
Prometheus,
being the
oh,
first
damn.
vampire story, I think it feels very influential and ever present in the story of the modern vampire. It follows a man, Aubrey, who met an odd lord at an event, who after being acquainted with, asks Aubrey to join him traveling the country, to which the man agrees, but quickly regrets, realizing the unsavory enjoyments of the lord, mainly causing ruin against those for his own pleasure, which Aubrey eventually runs off to and shacks up with an innkeeper's daughter, who tells him the tale of a vampire, which fits the odd lord Aubrey left behind to a T. Eventually, Aubrey and his lover are attacked, her throat slashed open, and Aubrey left injured after being nursed back to health by the mysterious lord, who reappears conveniently after the attack. Feeling indebted to him after he nursed him back to health, Aubrey joins him back on the travels until they're attacked, and he sees the lord be killed, and he makes Aubrey swear to never speak of seeing his death, as he dies laughing. Aubrey eventually goes home and is shocked to see the Lord reappear, revealing
Oh
his
my
engagement
God.
to Aubrey's sister and that their wedding date is the day he was sworn to never speak of the Lord's death until. Aubrey's last words were revelations of who the Lord actually was. But it was too late. The Lord had already fled the scene and left his new bride dead, drained of blood. This first story of the vampire establishes him as an aristocrat, a very powerful, sly, cunning man.
This is where the tropes come in that we are used to. The sun, the bats, the fangs. Well, the fangs are kind of already a historical thing, but still.
And even this point of relationships and some point of, let's say, seduction, because baby, that's all what the modern vampire is. If we're talking seduction and gothic literature and early vampires, we have to talk about one little book before we get to Bram and his entire creation of the modern vampire, and that's one of my personal favorites as a fruity little Irish person, and that is Carmilla. The book follows Laura, a woman
Carmilla!
living in a secluded castle in Austria, who regales how when she was 6, she was visited at night by a beautiful visitor in Bid, but she was told it was nothing but a dream by everyone. Eventually, a carriage arrives at the castle, containing a young girl Laura's age, Carmilla. It's almost instantly recognized that this is the woman from the dream she had. Two girls begin a tumultuous relationship, with becoming close, but Carmilla never revealing anything about herself, and the eventual romantic desires held between the two for each other. Dreams of a large cat coming onto Laura in the night and biting her chest, to slowly turn into a woman and creep off. Soon enough, Laura falls ill, and it's eventually revealed that Carmilla is in fact a form of an old vampire. They find her tomb, they stake her, and cut her head off for dead. The book carries an immense sense of
That sounds like a fucking awesome book, though.
tension between the two characters and just impending dread and doom the entire time. We know nothing good is to happen between this relationship between the two women, and the, of course, just complexities of this now emotional convention and vampire violent desire. As well, Carmilla is truly a book of female empowerment, disguised as a simple gothic literature. Our leads are both women that are shown as equals to, if not above men, in multiple interactions within the book. Carmilla is the opposite of the male vampire. She's involved with her victims emotionally and physically. And this starts the entire conversation of duality within the vampire, the affliction between humanity and the new life.
It's a very interesting balance, too, that constantly fights. It's like saltwater and freshwater right next to each other.
The attraction and repulsion felt, heterosexuality and homosexuality. Carmilla truly does nothing but show absolute duality within every aspect of choice. And of course, the major representation of sexual repression, as the vampire is nothing but the physical manifestation of suppression, immorality, and indulgence of the humankind. Although it's not the first, it is undeniable that Bram Stoker's book, Dracula, is the creation of the modern vampire.
Indeed.
Bram's research into Dracula and vampires as a whole creating this book was extensive, to say the very least. He spent years digging through folklore and stories to craft this tale. And if you are somehow unfamiliar with the novel Dracula, it's told more of as a historical event than necessarily a protagonist-led narrative storytelling. It's formatted through letters, news articles, and diary entries. Opening with a man.
I love Dracula. If you haven't read Dracula, dude, you need to. It's such a good read, and honestly, it won't even take up that much of your time.
Jonathan Harker, going on a business trip to meet with a Count Dracula. During this meeting, soon enough, he realizes he is in the presence of a vampire, and he flees, going back.
Dracula is a legendary character, indeed.
But the Count then moves and terrorizes the small seaside town in England. The book ultimately ends with a group of men hunting and killing the Count, led by Abraham van Helsing. Many people reference Vlad Dracul, Vlad the Impaler, as the major inspiration behind Dracula itself, but historians actually discount this completely. There's no evidence of Bram ever researching Vlad or taking inspiration from Vlad. The name Dracula he actually found in reference of a library as Dracul being son of dragon, which is why Vlad was called that, or even some people reference that Dracul became known as synonymous with devil in Romanian. So Vlad was never actually in Bram's mind a single instance of creating Dracula. This seemed to just be a very odd pairing of the same name of two bloodthirsty men.
Which makes sense because, like, Dracula was considered like a devil of some sort, the way he, his mannerisms were. Sure, Bela Lugosi gave us a great portrayal, but in the book, it feels more animalistic.
One real and one fictional. And unbeknownst to Bram Stoker, he had now tied a Romanian war hero into the entire fabric of the vampire. Bram was most likely inspired by traditional folk Irish tales of supernatural entities, as Ireland is the birthplace of so much supernatural stories and histories
Yes.
and events, and that's its own entire giant hole to get into, because Ireland truly was the land of the pagans. Like, supernatural creatures were a matter of fact, and if you were an Irish child, you were told plenty of tales surrounding them, and of course, just the entire historical precedent of people impaling the dead and looking for vampires, making sure people weren't rising from the grave and causing plagues on the town.
Yeah.
Brahms' entire inspiration of Dracula and the creation of it seemingly was just his cultural existence as a young Irish boy. And even with all the research, Brahm did himself craft new ideas surrounding the vampire that are everlasting. The fact that a vampire must be invited to enter a home and can't come in without so. Not having a reflection in the mirror.
That.
This was based on the folklore that mirrors showed the human soul. So Brahm adopted this.
Mirrors also are gateways into other worlds. That's why when people talk about black mirrors made out of obsidian, they're used for divination into the spirit world.
To Dracula, who would no longer have a human soul. And even the necessity of having soil from the homeland. Unlike Dracula, most stories surrounding vampires didn't mention them traveling much, if ever. As well, we see the influence from previous stories. Dracula is an aristocratic, seductive vampire, such as the one mentioned in The Vampire. He lives in a castle and transformed into an animal, as we see in Carmilla. Dracula is the amalgamation of every vampire that came before him, and he would be the source of every vampire after him. After Dracula, there is one fictional vampire whose existence has shaped the contemporary vampire, that being Nosferatu.
Yeah,
who
Nosferatu.
Has crafted the cinema-era creature of the night. In Nosferatu, we're set into Germany with a man Hutter that works for an estate company who's shipped off to Transylvania to work with a Count Orlok, who wants to make a move to his city. Eventually, Hutter wakes up in Orlok's castles with bite marks on his neck, and unbeknownst to him, Orlok has already started the seemingly obsession and possession of Hutter's wife, Ellen. After seeing a photo the man kept of her, commenting on her neck. Orlok then comes...
It's so interesting because we have a Nosferatu story with Johnny Depp as Van Helsing. And then the most recent Nosferatu story, his daughter Lily Rose played Ellen. Insane.
Causing a mass plague and widespread death. Ellen eventually reads a book she's told not to read, which, me too, girl. And she finds out that the only way to defeat the vampire is the sacrifice of a pure-hearted woman. Ellen then chooses to sacrifice herself to the Count to spare the entire town of his havoc. The film ends with Hutter embracing his now dead wife and the visual destruction of Orlok's castle. The first depiction ever.
Yeah, Count Orlok fucking... How do I put it? It's like the octopus's level of post-nut clarity, bro. Like, he got so much pussy, he died.
Of the vampire being hurt by sunlight is from this film, which is the escalation of Brahms' novel in which Dracula is simply weakened by it, but it doesn't lead to his demise. Now, the amount that Nosferatu took from Dracula is to the point the movie kind of should have just been called, unofficially Dracula. So much so that Brahms' widow would end up suing the makers of this film because it was infringing on so much of the copyright and calling for the destruction of the film, which this film was almost completely destroyed to history. Even the one copy being sent over to England for a private screening, Florence, Brahms' widow, said she had it burned, and that they themselves, Britain, declared it to be
Yeah, you didn't know that male octopi, when they get laid, that, they die afterwards? Immediately afterwards? The nut be hitting so hard that they just fade out of existence.
Horrible for distribution. Many, many copies of the original Nosferatu were completely destroyed, to the point people thought that this movie was lost to time. But, of course, there were sparse copies kept around, and after enough distribution, by the 1960s, Nosferatu became a cult classic film, and is absolutely so fucking relevant right now with the last remake of its kind. Nosferatu was really born out of the allegorical nature of the war. The art director and producer for the film had served in World War I. While in Serbia, he was told the tale of a local farmer that was stalking the village from past the grave, and the locals had to dig him up and stake him to end his terror. They noted his appearance of large, protruding teeth, which, once again, skin shrinkage, but this would absolutely inspire the visual appearance of Count Orlok in Nosferatu. Well, he described the war as...
See, I like Nosferatu because I've never been a fan of, like, the fancy schmancy, like, attractive vampires. I like the allure of the vampire, but Nosferatu really plays into, this is a monster, you know?
Quote, monstrous event that is unleashed across the earth like a cosmic vampire to drink the blood of millions and millions of men, unquote. And the amount of visual representations and allegorical natures within Nosferatu is so insane. The lighting in this movie is beautiful. It is kind of the most important part of Nosferatu is the lighting. The entire filmography of a creature creeping in the shadow that's Nosferatu. That comes directly from this. And I love how much they delved into the occult nature of the vampire Nosferatu, because most people that worked in this film were weirdly war guys who were obsessed with the occult, and that's a whole thing of the war and the occult intermixed into each other. But it's
New
like
video
how
topic.
in Carmilla, we see that she turns into a large cat-like creature, typically a feminine, sly, cunning creature of the sort. Whereas in Dracula turns into a dog, a kind of brutish, brutal, aggressive character. And in Nosferatu,
I mean, all vampires are monsters, but a lot of them don't look like monsters. A lot of them look sexy and attractive. And while that seduction is a part of vampirism, at the same time, like, for the folk tales that we hear, it's nice to have some that are actually scary.
he turns into rats, harbingers of death, bringers of plague, in a story that is frankly about just how fucking monstrous Nosferatu is. Previous vampires passed off as humans. There is no such possibility for Orlok. His large pointed ears, giant knife-like teeth, that seemingly keep his mouth forcibly opened at times. He cannot creep the streets of London to find a suitor to drain of blood for the night. And I think his appearance also plays in part with the entire nature of him also being just such a representation of loneliness.
Yep.
He gains this obsession for Ellen because, for all we know, this is the first time Nosferatu or Count Orlok has ever actually seen a woman. So he gets so innately obsessed. We see the scenes of him just alone, peering through windows. Nosferatu is absolutely an allegorical film about how loneliness can consume and kill you, as well as so is the vampire. Forced to walk at night, forced to live forever. It is the entire nature of the vampire to be an allegorical system for human feelings as a whole.
Yep, I can agree with that, yeah.
War, religion, suppression, loneliness, love, agony, death. The vampire is a man-made creation because, frankly, the vampire is everything man wants control over. And this makes it such a beautiful piece of story work and artistry and something you can apply to quite literally anything. And I think that is why the vampire is still upholding one of the longest standing legacies of being a fictional creature. And that takes us into the modern day of vampires. I'm going to tell you right now, look at me.
Okay.
You know I love Anne Rice to a degree that is not healthy for either of us.
Talk your shit, Darby.
And that entire vampirism kind of deserves its own video. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about Anne Rice and her creation of the modern vampire. Let's call it the contemporary vampire. So, save. I wish Darby mentioned this. Save it. We'll do more vampire stuff later. Okay, this is a brief history, not the complete history. The contemporary vampire would be a much more humanized creature, one garnering much more sympathy than the previous plague bringers and animalistic creatures of the night. Anne Rice created and perfected the egotistical, self-hating humanoid vampire with her novel Interview with the Vampire, released in 1976. Previously, we had seen a more cold, animalistic nature of the vampire. The creatures written by Rice were more emotionally driven and vulnerable. It made them more investable to read. You need to know the outcomes of Louis' actions against Lestat and vice versa. They were not just vampires, but victims, lovers, and existentialists. They questioned their entire being of vampire and previously human. The creation of Interview with the Vampire ignited the 20th century revival of vampire writing, and that one can argue has still not gone away, with almost all cinematic vampires adopting her complexly human and romantic portrayal of the undead monsters, and the ever-present representation of homosexuality and the vampire. After her film adaptation of the novel, which The Vampire Chronicles has now been turned into a television program, subsequent media franchises such as True Blood, Buffy, Vampire Diaries, or Twilight follow this misunderstood.
I was not a fan of Twilight, but then again, I understand why people like it.
Brooding creature that seemingly at times places everlasting life and blood consumption below love and partnership. Modern vampire is truly crafted from literature, and a means of art, inspiration, and outlet for humanity. The vampire represents disease, the unexplained, war, death, love, fear. Every range of the emotional spectrum can find its way into being represented as the vampire, a thing of true duality. Life between death, giving and taking. The vampire is a human creation because, frankly, humanity is vampiric. And although we now have the very true belief that vampires are but a thing of fiction.
Okay, most of you do, but, like, please, Darby, I am begging you to make a video on vampires in the real world, because there's a whole occult path based on the idea of the vampire. Please, I am begging you.
There, to this day, will be stories popping up about people believing they've interacted with a real creature of the night, with even some 20th century villages having documentation on continuing corpse impalement. Seemingly, the vampire will never die. I would argue there is no other fictional being that will ever stand the test of time with humans like the vampire. The vampire stands as the ever-present physical representation of the obsession of morality and death, and societal representations of impulses and desire man carries. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, thank you so much.
Thank you, Darby. Alrighty. And that's where we're going to end it here today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. It's been super fun to have you. I'm going to go take a nap. My head is a little hurty and I'm still smelling colors, so I'm going to go take a nap. I hope you enjoyed reacting with me today, but we're going to go ahead and go. So